Well, welcome everyone. My name is Todd Diefendorfer. I'm the Deputy Director of the City of Columbus Department of Neighborhoods. And welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. I see so many familiar faces and new faces as well, so always excited to see new faces in the room. See a number of graduates from the New American Leadership Academy, some of our current members, members of the Community Relations Commission, so it's tremendous to have so many people coming together today for this really important conversation. The work of the Department of Neighborhoods, we're really focused on empowering our residents to be involved in their community. We recognize that when residents are empowered, that's a key aspect to having sustainable, positive community change. In doing this work, we provide a number of tools for residents across Columbus to use. So everything from the 3-in-1 system. So if you have an issue with your refuse collection, you can call us up. Issues with code enforcement, that type of thing. We have our neighborhood liaisons who are out working with our area commissions and our civic associations to help solve those challenging problems that exist in our neighborhoods. To taking on big, really big, sticky issues. Working with residents as we plan and think about the future in Linden, on the Hilltop, how we can put those plans together and implement them, how to take on challenging issues like disparities that exist in our community with My Brother's Keeper work, and also looking at issues of discrimination with the Community Relations Commission's efforts. The Community Relations Commission is a division of the Department of Neighborhoods. Really, the work that we do there is looking at education. So again, thank you for being here today for this conversation. And also providing a service where we do investigation of complaints of discrimination in the community. So today with the Lunch and Learn and the series this year, we're really bringing both of those pieces of our work together with the Community Relations Commission. So looking at both how do we educate on some of the different protected classes that we have in our city code, and also wanting to then provide everyone with more education and tools to think about what are these issues, how do they show up in the communities where we all live, and what can we do in our own way to help make a difference. So that's really what today's about, is providing additional tools to all of us to really help make a difference. So with that, I'd like now to turn it over to Pedro, who's our investigator for the CRC. He's also moderator for today to talk a little bit more about the work of the investigation side and then also introduce the conversation. Pedro?
Is it morning time? Yeah, good morning still, and Ramadan Mubarak to everybody. Thank you so much for being here for the second session of the 2019 Lunch and Learn series. Todd really covered a lot of it. You know, the CRC, as a part of the Department of Neighborhoods, wants to make sure that as far as civil rights are concerned, you are engaged and empowered to make a difference, and the difference that you would like to see. So, you know, accepting those complaints is one part of it, but the educational opportunities about the protected classes and what is illegal in Columbus is incredibly important. So thank you for demonstrating the importance of that work by being here today. Thank you, Hound Dogs Pizza, for the pizza, and Friends of the Community Relations Commission for the desserts. And yeah, we're really excited about today. I think a few things that it would be important to note before I move on is this conversation is not only important because of what's illegal and, you know, the hate that we wish to end in the community, but also today we'll be focusing on trauma. It is National Mental Health Awareness Month in the United States, and we see these issues popping up increasingly in different communities. So that's going to be one lens of our conversation today. Second is that we know this conversation is happening during the holy month of Ramadan. So for those of you who are fasting, we apologize for bringing Hound Dogs Pizza in, but we know that the accommodation of Ramadan, the holy month, is an incredibly important public accommodation, which goes in with our conversation today. So just those two things that I think we should, you know, recognize as we move on. Today's program will consist of a panel discussion of our esteemed group of panelists for about an hour, and then you'll notice you're kind of chunked into separate groups. So the idea is we don't want this conversation to end when the panel discussion is over. At your tables, there were packets, 2 sheets of paper stapled together, the first of which you're more than welcome to take notes on. And at the bottom, you'll notice that we have an invitation for our third Lunch and Learn series to wrap up the series for 2019. And on the second page, you'll find some questions to help facilitate a group discussion. Now, when we go to the group discussion, you by no means have to adhere strictly to these questions, but they're just to get the ideas going. And then lastly, we will have some audience members come up and talk about the discussion that they had and how can we continue this work past 11/11 in the Continental Room on May 16th. Because we know discrimination is an ongoing issue that's not going to end at the end of today, tomorrow, next week. And we would be foolish to think that we could end discrimination, but we'd also be foolish to not try. So with that, I would like to introduce our panel. I'm going to be introducing your name, title, and organization, and then we'll move on to the first question. So starting at the very left, we have Tariq Touré, who is the Director of Refugee Services at Jewish Family Services. Round of applause for Mr. Touré. He's a humble guy. He didn't want that. Next, we have Ms. Ramona Reyes from the Our Lady of Guadalupe Center. She's the director and also a member of the Columbus City Schools Board of Education. Round of applause. We also have Jacqueline Kifuko, who is a refugee organizer with Community Refugee and Immigration Services. We all know them as Chris. Round of applause. Elvis Saldias, who is a community organizer and incoming law student. Thank you for being here today. And last and obviously not least, we have Angela Lloyd as Executive Director of the Ohio Legal Assistance Foundation. All right, let's get started. So the first question, we already know a little bit about our panelists, their name and their organization, but my question to you is, how did you find yourself to become involved in the immigrant refugee community? And we'll start off to the left this time with Mr. Touré.
Good morning still. So I currently work for an agency that was founded about 110 years ago on the values of the Jewish community and the Jewish people. That value, it still is transformed into helping not only the Jewish community but other communities. When I first started about 15 or 16 years ago, the wave of the Somali community was arriving in record numbers, and the miscommunication between our city currently and the community itself there was a huge disconnect. So I luckily started at the right time. I made sure that the community had its economic situation and help them find their jobs and support our community. So that's really what I've been doing. I've been supporting the community to economically support themselves and help them start business and help them get jobs, and this is what we've been doing. Could I give a little bit of report, or do I still have time?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So last fiscal year, we served about 646 people in the community at large. $5.4 million was returned in taxes. And out of that, 215 were refugees, and the earned income was $5.3 million in taxes only from the refugee community that we served. 1.3 million in taxes were returned to our city and county and the state and federal. So we are making impact, and not only us, but there are other partners, Ethiopian Tawhid Social Services, Chris is here, us together, and other Somali community agencies who are on the ground supporting the new American community and the refugees.
Okay. Good afternoon. Okay, good morning. I'm sorry. I know, I had to look at the clock. So I'm from the Our Lady of Guadalupe Center. We are one of 13 programs that is under the Catholic Social Services umbrella. So those agencies predominantly work in immigrant and refugee statuses throughout the United States. I've had the opportunity to actually travel to McAllen and work with the separated families that you all heard about in the news. I also was able to travel to San Diego and work with the caravan that were coming through the Tijuana border. That's one of the advantages of working with Catholic Social Services, or disadvantages. Our organizations are pretty small, so a lot of times we do have to reach out to other partner agencies in order to do our work. The Guadalupe Center really focuses predominantly on the west side, and about 97% of our clients are of Hispanic background. We serve over 3,500 families. We have a pantry, ESL, classes, immigration services. We have a licensed social worker to provide case management. We do benefits assistance, medical referrals, job referrals, community events. You name it, if our community needs it, we try to figure out how to support them in that fashion. We are currently looking at adding a mental and trauma health navigator, and we're working with the city on that. But most importantly, and I think we'll answer it in the second question, so I won't get ahead of myself, there are specific needs that are not addressed for this population. We are one of 2 agencies that actually deals with this population, and both agencies do different work. We try not to be duplicative to ensure that our resources are utilized to the best of our ability. How did I get to here? Well, I've always been an advocate for those who are disadvantaged. I've worked with Big Brothers Big Sisters, Direction for Youth, as a member of the Columbus Board of Education. I left a 23-year career at Nationwide Insurance in order to help Catholic Social Services to convert a food pantry into an actual community center. We've been open now as a community center for over 1.5 years, so we're very happy and we're growing, and we're always looking for volunteers.
Thank you. Who of you knows Chris? Yes, that's interesting, so I don't need to go in the details. So Chris is Community Refugees and Immigration Services. It's one of the 2 refugee resettlement agencies here we have in Columbus. It's an affiliate organization to Church World Service, which is a national refugee resettlement organization. How did I get involved in this? I'm a refugee organizer. So 2 years ago, I was a refugee stuck in Nairobi, and one of the key things that I remember, as a refugee, you don't have a right as a human being. You have to struggle to get what you want, and that didn't kind of like go down well with me. I raised up to put our voices out, more especially for the single parents. It was very hard for a single mom to, more especially those who are held back because of the language barrier. Because for me, I had an education back in my country as a social worker. I felt the need to help out, to speak, despite the fact that I was also going through the same struggles. It didn't put me down. I was a high-risk pregnant mother at the time, but I turned my tiny room into a small office to help out refugees put out their voices and explain issues that are affecting them. So I became a voice. And when I got here, immediately I realized it was the same case with the single mothers and then the LGBTI communities. Some of them are very shy to speak out, but I feel like if I do it, then they will understand the need to do that. So that's how I got into this responsibility. And from then, I have had over 10 meetings with state elected officials, and surprisingly, many of them do mention it's their first time to interact with a refugee. And one of my successes, we've had Congresswoman Joyce Perry and Representative Steve Stavers during the Refugee Caucus. For the first time, they realized the need to speak out on behalf of the refugees in the Congress. Thank you.
Good afternoon or good morning. My name is Elvis Saldias, and I got involved in this space primarily because I'm an immigrant myself. At the age of 9, my mother decided to move my sister and I to rural northwest Ohio. We come from Bolivia. That's where I was born and raised. I didn't speak any English until I started learning it here. And we came into this country on a visa, and then the visa expired, and then we became undocumented. And I grew up in a little town outside of Toledo called Wasion, Ohio, and grew up undocumented, was otherwise a regular kid, but always had that burden. And I didn't do much about it growing up because a lot of people don't want other people to know that that's your status. It's something to be concerned if you have that status. So about the time that I was graduating college was when our current president was running. And when he became the Republican nominee for president, I thought to myself, well, he's fairly successful at this and he's spreading a message that is not true when it comes to what he says about immigrants, specifically undocumented immigrants. And being an undocumented immigrant, I thought I had to speak out against it and help people understand what the real people behind these stats are. I have DACA. I received DACA when I was 20 years old. For those that are not familiar with DACA, DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's a program that President Obama rolled out as an executive action in 2012, and it basically gives us protection from deportation, and it gives us the ability to work. Prior to that, you really can't work, you can't drive, I wouldn't even be able to, get into this building because you require ID to even walk into this building. An undocumented person doesn't have that. So everyday things like that. So I've lobbied members of Congress. I've met with them in D.C. I do things like this to help spread the word on what undocumented people are like and what we're doing in your community. So that's me, and that's how I've gotten involved in this space.
So my name is Angie Lloyd, and I have to start by saying what an incredible privilege it is for me to sit at this table with these people. And then I have to ask a small indulgence in that how I got involved is actually a long story. I'll try to make it short. So I was all ready to go out as a 20-year-old and, do good in the world and join the Peace Corps. So I had the privilege to live in Kenya in the end for 3 years. And so I had the experience of living somewhere that wasn't my home, and except without any of the trauma, right? I was choosing to be there, but had the whole experience, like different food, which, by the way, Kenyan food is the best ever. Oh my gosh. But, different things and different jokes, and so I had the experience. Because I loved it so much, I actually had the privilege of working for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees while I was there. So I had the experience of working with refugees and thought, oh my gosh, this is fabulous. I must go back and become a lawyer. So I came back and became a lawyer. I had the privilege of working in Hong Kong with Vietnamese refugees, and was appalled at how they were treated and what was happening and how the society really, literally, physically tried to hide them from everyone. They literally warehoused them in airplane hangars on separate islands away from the Hong Kong folks. And I was all upset about this, and a wonderful lawyer, Australian lawyer, said to me, this is not your fight. Go back to America and make sure the United States is treating refugees correctly. So I thought, okay, that's a plan. So I came back, and I have been, I had a fellowship and was representing undocumented folks in Los Angeles, and then moved to New York and started doing that work. And then for family reasons, we moved to Columbus, and I was teaching at OSU in the clinic and brought representation of immigrants to OSU, and the clinic is still doing it today. I'm very excited. But then I had an opportunity to move to the Ohio Legal Assistance Foundation. And the Ohio Legal Assistance Foundation, which I guarantee you have never heard of, is actually the largest funder of legal aid in Ohio. And legal aid are legal services available to folks who can't afford to pay a private lawyer. And the work they do is critical in terms of helping people maintain housing, be safe from domestic abusers, help veterans get their benefits. One of the challenges is the other large funder of legal services is the federal government, and the federal government restricts who legal services can serve, and they don't allow them to serve undocumented immigrants. So I get up every day with plenty of work to do, because in addition to funding, and we're the largest funder of legal services, and we do that, I spend time trying to find more money for legal services that can serve anybody. And I continue to try as much as I can to volunteer my time to myself, continue to represent folks. And I highly recommend volunteering with Ramona, because she will find you plenty of work. It's excellent, it's great. But it's a privilege for me every day. I'm representing one of the families who was separated at the border. I've actually got about way too many, 16 or 17 clients and families I'm working with as a pro bono attorney, in addition to my day job, we helped publish the report that some of you saw, trying to talk to Ohio about what a tremendous resource our immigrants are. There's nobody better. They bring so much to us as a community. We should be throwing parties and welcoming them. So that is my sort of everyday half job to say that and to try to get funds to do that. And so I've been doing this for just years and years, and it is a privilege and a blessing, and I'm just appreciative that I can do anything. So that's me.
Thank you all. National origin is one of 12 protected classes in the city of Columbus, and there are others, including sexual orientation, gender, sex, military status, familial status. And I think that when it comes to national origin, sometimes we can get confused about what exactly that means, and there's a lot of terms associated with that that can become confusing, such as refugee, immigrant. And in Columbus, we've kind of gathered around this term New American. And we have what the textbooks tell us what a refugee is. And Angela mentioned the High Commission on Refugee for the UN. And a refugee is defined by them as someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. And there's some language that comes after that. And I think we kind of generally understand that. But you're the experts. And my next question for you is, what does it truly mean to be a refugee, an immigrant, or someone with uncertain immigration status? And kind of going to point this in the direction first of Jacqueline and Elvis, and then, of course, the rest. Would love to hear what you have to say as well.
Although, actually, can I ask a huge favor?
Yeah, of
course.
course.
Can I start with a legal answer? Sorry, the
Yeah.
lawyer in me. And then, and because you guys are going to say the more interesting thing. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick, the lawyer part of it. So I wish we would all adopt New American, because distinguishing people based on status just harms them. I mean, I don't want anybody distinguished based on status. If you think about immigration statuses, and I'm not going to do a whole class, refugees actually have a fairly secure status. It's all those other folks who aren't refugees, who might need asylum, which is essentially getting refugee status, but you got here first, or who have a 100-year wait because they're the brother of a legal permanent resident, which means they can't actually get any legal immigration status. So I just want to totally, just please use New Americans, and please recognize, I can't tell you every day somebody says, yeah, they want to become a citizen, and you literally want to say, yeah, don't we all? Do you understand how hard that is, right? There are so many steps along the way. So refugees do have status. They have fairly secure status with a fairly straightforward path to, in fact, become a legal permanent resident and then a citizen. But all those undocumented folks with family members who've lived here for years, who have gone to school here, who've done things, they are in an undocumented status. And it's sometimes very hard to become documented. And you can be in a situation where, and people don't understand this, you know, your mom could be documented. You could have lived here for umpteen years, but because of the timing that you weren't a minor with legal status when your mom became documented, you're not documented, and now you've had a U.S. citizen child who's documented, and now you're the 26-year-old mom. Grandma's legal, baby's legal, you're not. And that happens. Anyway, okay, so I'm done.
No,
So-
thank you for that distinction.
Sorry.
That's exactly, the kind of thing that we're trying to parse out here. And we've tried to be intentional with the panelists to make sure we have good representation from the undocumented community, from larger problems of immigration, and then more specifically, we know that in Columbus, we are a large target for secondary resettlement for refugees. Those kind of terms can get confusing. So that is incredible. And, I kind of moved forward to what does it really mean? But Angela's point is incredibly important, too, because we need to know these terms a little bit better if we're going to work in these communities. So that opened the question up again. What is, kind of beyond that, can you tell me a little bit more?
I could give you some, personal experience, I suppose. When I turned 18, I was an undocumented adult. I joined the ranks of my mother, the others I knew that were undocumented, had to work, had a different set of responsibilities. I started working as a migrant worker in the border between Michigan and Ohio, and I did that all summer before I decided to enroll in a community college part-time. once I got DACA, so as a 20-year-old, I was finally able to get something like a driver's license. I was finally able to drive around, get a job legally, do a bunch of things that everyday adults do. I can imagine it's much tougher for somebody like my parents' generation who was wholly undocumented, maybe doesn't even speak English as well as I do. And as a testament to what Angie said, that it's very difficult to become documented once you're undocumented, I'm proof of that because I've been here since I was a little kid. I speak the language as well as anybody here. In fact, I speak it better than Spanish at this point. And I'm educated here. I graduated college here, and I'm a full-time, gainfully employed person here in insurance in Columbus. And for me, I'm still stuck in there because the process by which an undocumented person becomes legal is either familial or it's employment-based. Not everybody can get an employment-based visa. They are probably only giving it to industries that are critical and very needed. And with family, you need to have a family member that's either a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. And if your whole family is undocumented, you're not going to get that path, which is why you have people that are here undocumented for years. That's why we have 11 million undocumented immigrants. It's not by choice. It's not that they don't want to pay a fine or get in line. It's that they don't have the ability to do so. That's why so many politicians on both sides of the aisle agree that the immigration system is broken, which is part of the work that I do is I want to try and change that so that we don't have a broken immigration system so that we can get these people like myself, out of the shadows and having normal everyday lives. As far as what this is like on a regular basis, I'm more privileged in the sense that I have DACA, so I'm able to live a more or less regular life, even though the status is temporary. It's currently probably going to end up in the Supreme Court because the Trump administration wanted to get rid of it, considering that it's an executive action. It's not something that's set in law. So the goal would be maybe to set it in law first, but I can just tell you that as like a 26-year-old person who works to support themselves, it represents a lot of uncertainty. I don't know what the future holds in 2 or 3 years. I guess that's better than a lot of other folks who at this point can't drive, don't have a license. So I'm thankful for that, and I'm also hopeful that we can get some type of legislation passed. But it's primarily, I think, being undocumented in this country is primarily about working and just trying to better your situation and hoping for change in the future.
Thank you. Before I dive into what I have to say, I'm really proud of Elvis. When I started off this work, he was one of the first people I met with. I remember contacting so many people out there. We had an event about DACA, but many of them, it's understandably right not to come out. But he was very open to speak out at the event, and thank you so much finding him meeting with him this other time. So getting back to the question, how do you feel when you're a refugee? Number one, there is no one who would love to leave their home country because that's where your history is. That's where you have a connection, you have a family. So running away from your country or fleeing your country is because you feel your life is not safe. And the time when I fled my country, I had a 2-year-old who I've never seen since then. That makes a total of 5 years since I last saw him. And that's why you see I'm very passionate to speak out and let people know it's a mother. A mother would not take up such a decision. You're a first-time mother, and you're caught out in the middle. You don't know who to save. When I stay back, I'm gonna lose my life, or he's gonna die with you. So you take up a decision. So being a refugee, that kind of trauma, we are talking about trauma. The 3 years I was in Nairobi, I don't think I was thinking straight. Up to now. I always step in and out. I'm glad that the state elected officials are used to me, so they're kind of like, right, we shall listen to you, we shall always be there for you and try to do what you ask us to do. And I'm so happy that to some point they've done that. But however, I don't have my son with me. So just imagine yourself in that kind of situation. So you come in a new country, you don't know anyone, you don't have any connection. At that time, I was also pregnant. I have a little boy. You come to the U.S. The journey from Nairobi to U.S., I don't remember anything. Because I would imagine what would happen to the boy I'm leaving behind. So many people think that refugees come here when they're excited. That would be the case, but sometimes no. The whole of 2017, I don't remember anything. but I was just moving. I have to protect the one I have, you know? So refugees also to some point feel they are less of human beings because of what they go through, losing everything and starting life all over again. We only talk about it, but it's hard, starting from scratch. You don't know how to pick up your life again. Every brick you try to build, you put it down again, and like, maybe I'm not taking the right direction. And to that point, I remember, I don't know if Mr. Sophie Abdi is inside this room. I texted him and emailed him, and like, I'm confused again. I found myself in Nairobi, I was confused. Now I'm in the US, I'm still confused, but I know the city of Columbus should have a solution for me, you know? And he was so kind. We had a meeting together, and I asked him a couple of stuff. How do I help other mothers who are in my situation? Because for me, I could write, I could talk, and I could explain what I was going through. But I had mothers in our community. Many of them didn't know what to do. The best they can do is just shut their doors and keep silent to their situations. Only what you hear is suicidal conversations and like, no, this is not right. You know, when you're living the other horrible situation, you're told you're going to start life again. You're going to be like the rest. But when you start off life, again, you feel it's not making sense. So that's one of the things I always tell people. When you're dealing with a refugee, don't take it for granted that life is normal because they're here. They're trying to struggle to get where you are. They're trying to make sense of the life they lost, like 20 years. So many people live in the camp for 20 years before they are approved to get to the US. And one of the things that I remember when I just reported to register as a refugee was the time when I had a conversation between two officials saying, this is how your life is going to be forever. I'm like, no, this is not right. But even if I'm out of my country, I need to be treated like a human being with dignity, respect, regardless. So at that point, I see one of the refugees in the crowd where we are run off to the freeway and he's knocked dead. I'm like, is this what exactly it means being a refugee? I grew up in a community with so many refugees, but I never reached a level of understanding what they go through until when I became one. So before you become one, you might not ever know what it means. And that's why we need a lot of interaction. We need a lot of understanding. I don't mean be so sympathetic to the level of spoiling them or spoiling us. We are human beings. We also need to reach a level where we feel like we belong. Many of the refugees don't, with the current climate, they don't feel they belong anywhere. So whoever is providing any services to the refugees, just have it at the back of the mind that refugees want to feel they belong where they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramona. Before we move on to the next question.
Yes, they said a couple of things that I just wanted to comment on. So I'm second generation. My grandmother came when she was 4 or 5 years old with my great-grandmother. And I've always been involved, so I always thought that I knew exactly what it meant to be an immigrant until I started working at Guadalupe Center and heard about 800 stories, and it's certainly changed my perspective. Many of us think, why? Why do people want to come to the United States? And continuously, we do hear, no one wants to leave their country. That's not, they love their country. And a lot of people say, well, why'd you leave your country? Why don't you adopt the United States? Well, why didn't you come here legally? A lot of our, what I call, instead of new Americans, I used in process. So a lot of folks who are in process, right? They're in some sort of legal process, whether they came as a child, whether they came as a spouse, whether they were a visitor and they overstayed their visa. Many of those folks, they can't afford the legal system that provides them the opportunity to get their legal status. One of the reasons I love Angela, and she yells at me all the time because I don't tell her to take the cases. I give her the clients. And then she hears the case, and then she comes and yells at me and says, I have to take that case. They can't afford it. I mean, do you know how much it costs to get first legal representation and then the absorbent fees just to file? So yes, she's providing her pro bono work, But then to file this form is $800, to file that form is $900, to file that form is $1,000, but then this form is, by the time you're done, it's $10,000, $15,000. These folks are selling their houses, they're borrowing from neighbors, they're doing all sorts of bartering in order just to get to their legal status. And then we've got people out there that are charging them these absorbent fees, and they're not actually promising or delivering the things that they need to get. And then there's this whole concept of get in line. Well, depending on whether you're a child and you're a U.S. citizen, whether you were born here, how'd you came in, when you came in, all those things, your line could be 150 years long. So if you come from Mexico, literally 150, so you will probably pass away in Mexico before you even get your day in court. So those are the things. I went and talked to some students, and they were asking all these questions, and they came from an affluent school district, not mine, and they asked all these questions, and I'm like, I want you all to know the reality. Like Elvis said, there's a reality out there that you're not hearing in the news, that you're not hearing from folks. This concept of lying, this concept of why don't you come here legally, why don't these whole, and then the concept of they get benefits, right? They can't work. You cannot work in the United States without a Social Security or a right to vote, to work. You cannot receive benefits. Trust me, we do everything, we try to figure it. You cannot receive any sort of assistance, Medicare, Medicaid, any of that if you do not have a legal status. You can't drive, as Elvis says, and we do have several mixed families where, like Angela said, we have mom's illegal, but grandma and grandpa might be legal, and then the child is legal. And then what happens when they capture mom? Just the other day, we were actually welcoming the bishop at Our Lady of Guadalupe, the brand spanking new bishop from the diocese. And just before he arrived, ICE stops two gentlemen outside. We looked outside, and we knew it was a work truck, so I walk up, and I'm like, hands up, because I don't know what they're going to do. So I'm like, I'm the director at the Sign Guadalupe Center. I just, you're eventually going to call me, so I'd like to see how I could help. We ended up driving the vehicle because they took the driver. He had legal status, but unfortunately a member of their household did not. He mentioned that, and they took that member. So ICE literally went back to that person's home and physically took hold of somebody in their household. These are the things that our immigrant population deals with. Their status is, and they're working on, and this is a family that's working on legal status, so they have they're just not quite there yet because it takes a long time. Legal status can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years, even those who qualify. So imagine you're 5 to 10 years waiting, not able to work, still have bills because you got to live somewhere, and you're still working towards that thing. So that I can talk from the immigrant piece, not a lot from the refugee. We don't deal with a lot of refugee, but those are the situations that we run into from the families that we encounter.
We'll move into that next. Ramona, you provide a great segue to our next question, which is kind of what are the misunderstandings of this community? Because we know that different treatment, fancy way of saying discrimination, oftentimes happens because people simply don't understand the differences between cultures, communities, and that's why we have the panelists. So my next question I'd like to open up with Tariq and then accept other remarks is, what are some misunderstandings about you or the people you serve? And then secondly, how do those misunderstandings turn into different treatment?
Well, it's the cliche of you taking my jobs. That's one of the things that we constantly hear. Resources. Since resources are very scarce, most local individuals will say, bringing all these immigrants and refugees will diminish our resources. Our schools are filled. That's one area of education that a lot of complaints are happening. Affordable housing. Some of the people that need the affordable housing claim that refugees and immigrants in general, new Americans, are saturating the resources that we need. And everybody in this room knows that is not true. Refugees and immigrants are contributing quite a bit to our society and our economic situation here in Columbus and Franklin County, and the nation for that matter. So it's a fear-mongering, and it's all of us need to really be vigilant and stand up and really point out to academic facts that does not support those theories that does not really match the reality on the ground. You know, if you lived in Columbus, at least for 25 years, you will notice there's a huge amount of, the landscape has changed. The taste of Columbus has changed. The color of Columbus has changed. And with that came with beauty and art and economic powerhouse and expansion of ideas. And above it all, we call ourselves Smart City now. So I encourage other cities to adopt those in rural Ohio and elsewhere to you know, for us to expand. So,
as the remaining panelists consider this question, I invite you to look through the lens of public accommodation, housing, and employment. And for those of you who don't know, these are 3 areas of protection in the city of Columbus. And public accommodation is probably the most confusing there. That's your right to be in a public space or sit down at a restaurant and be treated the same as any other person who would go in there. So I open the remarks to Ramona.
So I just want to start with, from a Latino perspective, because again, I got to come from my space. From a Latino's perspective, just an FYI, even though I'm Mexican, not every Latino is Mexican, and not every Latino likes tacos. So, so I'm going to start right there, because even as a second generation, a professional, I love tacos. As a professional, a very small question that I got very often, and still sometimes do, is like, where's the best place to get tacos? Though it comes from a place of innocence, because you really want to know where's the best place to have tacos, right? That's just be cognizant of things like that. When you're talking about what's the root of discrimination, what's the ignorance around that, sometimes that's misinformation. It's okay to ask me, where am I from? It's okay. It's okay to ask me, do you prefer Hispanic or Latino? I will tell you I prefer Mexican American or Ramona. Ramona's pretty simple, very easy to remember. So those questions are okay, because we rather have that question than an assumption. So not all Latinos are from Mexico. Not all of us are illegal. So you're talking about what are the misunderstandings. Not all of us are illegal. Not all of us are poor. Not all of us do not speak English. We might have a very heavy accent, you know, but we don't all, and not everybody speaks Spanish. We're not all uneducated. Many of the people that are coming here, that are fleeing their country, are doctors, are lawyers, and can't get a job. They're here driving taxis. They're here trying to cut your grass and getting side money because their legal status is not quite where it needs to be. And not all of us deserve to be paid less than the work that we're required to do. So the lower wages, I just want to share real quick, because I know we have a lot of questions and a lot of information. From a perspective of housing, everybody wants the American dream. One of the things that has impacted our community is we have people out there selling that American dream falsely. We have had people go out there and create contracts where they tell you, if you pay me this amount for this many years, at the end of that, those years, you'll own the home. And then when that end gets there, they say, now you owe me $25,000. So I don't know about you all, I have a job and I don't have $25,000 in my back pocket. So therefore, they spend these 10 years and then they lose their home. There's a lot of those things, fraud. They will put out a announcement on Craigslist and say, this house for rent, even though there's an HER or RE/MAX or somebody else's sign in front, so it could be your house that you're trying to sell or rent, somebody will go out and put a statement out there. The RE/MAX agent or the property owner will say rent is $1,400. Our community goes out, gets this Bob person out there, and Bob says it's $800. And if you give me 3 months in advance plus utilities, which equals about $3,500, we'll reduce it to $2,500. And here's everybody, again, borrowing and da-da-da-da, and then they go and they show up and it's false, and they lose that $3,000. So those are the things that happen with housing for our communities. They're taking it because of the lack of language or the excitement of leaving that American dream. They prefer to be, and I mean, I actually had to bring a person in here and call the actual owner, show them on the auditor's webpage, this is the picture of the person who actually owns the house. She did not believe me. So I'm a trusted, well, I thought we were a trusted individual. She's just said, if you don't hurry up and help me translate these articles and sign the lease that had no title, no person, no nothing, we all know what a lease looks like. Somebody just basically took a piece of paper and said, I rent XY, sign here with $3,500. And those are the things that, from a housing perspective, we get less house for the value. They're just taking advantage of, and it's a lack of understanding the laws. We're trying to do better as a community. There's many Latino leaders in here that we're trying to communicate and ensure that we give that information. So if you hear somebody doing something, make sure you ask. What, that kind of is like saying if it sounds like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And we just have to ensure that we continue to give information.
Thank you. And so the first part of our series of questions kind of focusing on that difference of treatment, the discrimination. We're coming up on about 25 minutes in the end of our panel. So last question for this kind of section would be, let's not leave on a negative note. So my question, skipping to question number 5, is what are best practices, tips, or lifestyle choices that individuals or organizations can adopt to kind of smooth some of these things over? Be proactive about what I'm hearing is, predatory behavior towards people who fall within this definition of national origin and that protected class. Start off with Angela.
Sorry,
Yeah.
only because it is so critically important, and I think one of the things that many of you can do, if not all of you can do, is what Ramona said, listen and be open, but then be willing to be the person who speaks out. Because I just had a conversation this morning about inappropriate treatment of one of my clients. And my client doesn't feel comfortable and shouldn't feel comfortable. I absolutely feel comfortable. I am absolutely going to demand that that never happen again and that there will be consequences if it does. So you have the ability to be a real partner and a real voice. And there are resources available through the city, so I know legal aid, but these housing contracts, it's not just the immigrant community that's being taken advantage of. If you hear about this, please, please, please reach out. Most of this is illegal, and we are actually working to address it, to try to hold people accountable. But imagine yourself not comfortable, right? And so try to be a help, because our new American community is, like us, they have joy, they have sadness, but as a general principle, they're not walking in comfortable shoes. So be there to help them and let them know it's okay, and be a voice for them, and reach out to the resources or help them find resources, because they really are just so vulnerable, and they are just doing amazing things for all of us. And we want to embrace them and welcome them and stand arm in arm.
I'm not a provider or work for an organization that provides these services, so I don't think I have much to add here, but I would echo what Angela said, and being open to those members of your community and to not assume certain things about them. I did have something in mind about the last question that was asked, just from personal experience. When I was an undergrad at Ohio State, for example, as a testament that undocumented immigrants do not get any type of federal aid, which is true, although I pay taxes like anybody else, we're not eligible for things like FAFSA. Just because we're low income doesn't mean we get money from the government to go to school. I had to pay for college out of pocket primarily. And then most recently, towards the end of last year when I left the job I had and I no longer had health care, I'm also not eligible for something like Obamacare or Affordable Care Act. I couldn't just go and shop even though I had the funds to pay for insurance because that's subsidized by the federal government. And I pay taxes like anybody else here that is employed. And I cannot, reap the benefits that my taxes go to, apart from them going to funding, public education and the military and a bunch of other things. So just know that. I feel like a lot of ignorance comes from lack of knowledge when it comes to specifically people's negative views about undocumented immigrants. I feel like some people think that, we're like given a computer by the government the moment you like cross the border or something, just as a welcome gift or something ridiculous like that, right? You're not. It's actually harder to be undocumented than it is to be a U.S. citizen for many different reasons. So just, I hope that people understand that, and part of the reason I speak out is to try and help people understand that, because I don't want people to have false views and then form opinions and then vote in elections that have real consequences based on those views.
Thank you. We have time for one more, Jacqueline.
Yeah, from the refugee perspective, many of the people know that they assume that refugees apply to get the U.S. That's not true. Actually, it's the U.S. government that goes ahead and picks on files. So that's one of the things I want you to know. And then secondly, people say that refugees come and reap the benefits and all that. Refugees are supposed to receive support from the government, from the federal government, for only 3 months. And that's not feasible. So you have to make sure in 3 months you're able to stand on your feet to pay all your bills back. And then after 6 months, you are supposed to pay your travel loan. So it's the other way around. They don't get from the government, but refugees give back to the government in a form of appreciation, because for years, for not being with the country you call home and U.S. becoming your own home for the rest of your life, that's how we pay back.
I just want to make sure that we answer that number 5 real quick. Tips, because I want to make sure that we don't leave without tips. A welcoming environment. That may mean that you might have to change your white walls to colored walls. May have to have some pictures, may have some things in different languages. That would be one recommendation. Provide someone who speaks language, the language that you're trying to serve. If you have somebody who's from that culture, that background, feasible. If you don't, what I am going to ask, and I know this is probably going to hit a nerve, refer them. Refer them to an organization that serves that population. We can't do it all. I know we want to, and you have a big heart. If you didn't have a big heart, you probably wouldn't be sitting in front of us. There are organizations in this community that can help better than you. If they can, then I would ask you, please refer them. It makes it so much harder for those of us who are serving those particular population to reverse something that you may have done, or because we waited too long, they may have missed a deadline, they may not qualify, we did it incorrectly in your quest to help. So if I have refugees coming in my center, that's not my expertise. I refer them out. And we all want to help, and we all want to say, well, I'm going to start a nonprofit. Instead of going out there and saying, I want to start a nonprofit, if you want to start one, maybe fill the gap that is not being filled by one that's not. If you want to help in that particular, volunteer for that nonprofit. And if they're not doing it right, then go right ahead. With the limited funds that our government is providing, when you take away from an organization that has a licensed social worker, then that licensed social worker may not be there next year because 10 other organizations popped up, and then no one has a licensed social worker. So there are opportunities out there. I just want to make sure that to your best intentions, help, welcoming, hire people that look like the population that you're trying to serve. That would be a couple of my tips.
And Turk, I'm not going to leave you out here. Go ahead.
Wow. I think these folks have covered everything else. Support new American businesses. Go out, shop, eat. And I've always said this, Americans are the luckiest people on the planet. The world came to you. You don't have to get a plane ticket to go. When I was a kid, to meet an American, it was very rare. But for you to meet a Somali here in Columbus, you're very lucky. I mean, get to know people. Integration is the only way that we can all advance both culturally, linguistically, economically, and everything else. So please support the people by supporting their businesses, and in return, not only they pay taxes, but also they hire Americans.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, we also want to make sure that we focus on kind of an emerging focus in our communities. And when we talk about the social determinants of health and other things, when we look at the national origin, trauma comes up a lot. We know that every community in Columbus is prone to some sort of trauma, no matter what way it kind of manifests, but the new American immigrant refugee community faces unique challenges with trauma. So that leads me to my question is, how does your community, the community you wish to represent or would like to talk about, process and manage I skipped a second to the next question. Pretend you didn't hear that. We're going to talk about what does it look like in general? What causes this trauma in your community? Start with Tariq.
Well, in the past 15 years or so that I've been doing this, I've met people that traveled on foot from the Horn of Africa to the Saharan Desert and went through the Mediterranean Sea and ended up in Europe and somehow find themselves. And I found also another group that traveled from Horn of Africa to South Africa to Brazil and walked to, Arizona. So if that's not going to cause you trauma, and the reason why you left actually is even 10 times worse than the journey itself. A couple of years ago, I met a young man in Greece that he was in a boat in the Mediterranean Sea, and he was 550 people on that boat, and him and 4 other people survived only. And I don't know about you, but for me, there's no way I will be able to function as a human being after that, to see that, that many people that was with me at some point died immediately. So not every refugee has gone through that experience, but there's many of refugees that have gone through that experience. And also, our friends from the south of the border have experienced that journey, that epic journey that people take. And, there's the domestic violence, there's other things that they're dealing with, the uncertainty of, how am I going to pay my bills? If you lived in a refugee camp for 20 years and you come to the United States and 3 to 8 months you're supposed to support yourself, and in this competitive job market, it is extremely difficult. This is what agencies like the one I work for, Jewish Family Services, and other agencies, partner agencies that are here, this is what the focus is, to make sure that trauma is dealt with, but also does not hinder the economic income. So that's the early trauma. But I tell you, I'm not a licensed person, so I'm not going to comment on this, but one thing I know is 20 years, there's the initial trauma of let me survive for now, and there is 25 years later, the trauma that I'm going to be dealing with. And a lot of other people a lot of practitioners and licensed people are telling me telling us as professionals this information now, because it happened to the Vietnamese community, it happened to the Holocaust survivor community, and it happened to other communities. So we cannot just look at survivability, we have to look at the long-term effect. How would it affect our city? How would it affect our community, 25 years later after the resettlement?
So, same story that Tariq, there are people that have actually come with trauma already. There's traumatic events that have occurred in their country. You see the television, the disarray in Venezuela, in Colombia, in El Salvador. We have folks who have had their life threatened, who have been shot at, that are here with bullet wounds, have had family members beheaded, and this is just south of the border. And then, like Tariq said, we do have coyotes that work very well along our U.S. border and charge lots of money and do violate our women, whether it's physical or mental. We actually wrote a little book a couple years ago, and we're trying to revise it. I had a lady who her and her uncle and a brother were blindfolded and asked to kneel, and they were calling their home country and telling their person, we need this amount of money or you won't finish the rest of the journey, even though they had already paid so much money for them to come over, and had guns, revolvers to their heads. She shared that, her and her uncle and brother were praying, and something happened. They were blindfolded, something happened. They heard a commotion, then they heard nothing, and they took that moment to unblindfold themselves and ran as fast as they could. And then now they're in the process of trying to ensure that they can get fully documented. I mean, this story after story, people in these current caravans are coming, didn't start the journey pregnant, but now are here and pregnant. We've have in Tijuana, not all of those folks came here, but we had a lady who was already about 8 months pregnant through her journey from El Salvador, came to California, so she walked that whole journey, and actually had her baby 8 days later after jumping the wall, because one of the questions that the organizations do ask us, how did you get here, what was the process, and you try not to listen, but you're in a small room where everything's going on, and she said, I jumped the fence, and I'm just thinking, an almost 9-month pregnant lady jumping a fence with a, and luckily her baby was born healthy and so forth. They're in infested areas. They may have come from a good home where it's clean and so forth, and now they're having to bathe after other people. They're having to ask for food. They're having to do a lot of things, and a lot of times they suffer in silence. Some of our cultures tell you do not share. You don't want to air your dirty laundry. You don't want everybody to know your story. You just want to survive. You just want to go through. And one of the reasons why we're looking for this grant money to have a health and trauma navigator is because, first, there's a very limited amount of counselors that speak Spanish, so they're having to deal with an interpreter. So those of you who work in that field, you know how difficult it is to get the actual comment and what's going on. When the person is dealing with the emotions, they're having to go through an interpreter, then they go to you and they go back. And even that process in itself, getting them to that state is very difficult. Then once here, struggles ensue. I had a lady who, I don't know why she decided to do this, but she couldn't afford electricity, decided to create a makeshift fireplace in a trailer, fell asleep. The trailer caught on fire, and she had barely enough time to escape with her kids. But now she has a half-burned trailer that we're working with. We're trying to help her. But she's a single mom, came from an abusive relationship. The abuser has since been deported back because he broke the law. So that part is true. You come here and you're going through your status. If you break the law, you do sometimes qualify to go back. So there's stories upon stories of these things, and there is, even if you are looking for help, the help is very limited. So we're all working to try to get those systems in place.
Thank you. And I guess we'll, for the sake of time, just loop in the second question to bundle this into, so what does the trauma look like, and then how does your community tend to process that?
I'll specifically talk about that. Sorry. Talk about the Ugandan community. In 2017, our president signed Kill Them All bill. As long as you identify or work with the LGBTI community, you were supposed to be killed. The international organizations came out, challenged that, but it didn't work out. So when I went to Nairobi, I invested much of my time to help out the young folks. We had so many kids drop out of school, fled the country, and one of them came out to me and told me how she led to her father's death. Because when he learned who she was, he couldn't cope up with that. So he just fainted and passed on. So going through that all the time, she's living a life of guilt that I led to my father's death. How do I change? And it's hard to explain that to a young kid, So, and staying on their own. So some of them are being resettled here. I know they are not openly coming out to explain who they are. And the fact that the time we came to Columbus, we already found a well-established Ugandan community. It's hard for them still to get into the community. So what I do, I reach out to LGBT organization and let them know that this group does exist, and it's hard, keep going back and forth, reaching out to them, explain to them, you can trust this person. They have an issue of trust. These individuals will help you cope up with your life. It's very hard. It's very hard for them, even when they know somewhere, somehow, somebody will understand what they go through. So a couple of times I do call upon them to get together, talk through what they're going through, to understand that working together, they will try to overcome some of the challenges. And, on a daily basis, they need to learn from one another to understand that it's okay, even if the current government is against that, it's okay for you to be who you are, and it's okay to live a life of, a normal life like the rest.
I think trauma in the undocumented community in America largely revolves around the fear of deportation. It's that feeling that you could be plucked out from your life really at any moment, while at work, at home. We heard some examples here. Growing up in the Toledo area, I'd hear about, raids at factories or even people being picked up at home. For example, put myself in my shoes as a 10-year-old. My mother was driving. I was raised by a single mother. She'd be driving around. Let's say, for example, if she was driving at night, she would always check her lights, make sure her tail lights were working, make sure her headlights were working. Because when you're undocumented and you're going about your everyday life, something as simple as being pulled over because your tail light is out could result in you being deported. And as a 10-year-old, I knew that because it wasn't hidden from me that we had that status, and I would fear for my mother being deported. So I think that caused some trauma in me. It meant that I really didn't speak out a whole lot. I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want good or bad attention. I just wanted to fly under the radar. And as I got older, another example would be, I think the secondary trauma around being undocumented is just the feeling of not belonging, of not being accepted, of the fact that you're doing something wrong. I was brought here against. It wasn't a decision that I had any choice. It was just my mother thought it was better for our future, so I was brought here, and I was basically making the best out of it like any other kid would. And when I was 16 or 17, when I wanted to take the ACT to go to college, I didn't have a formal ID. I didn't have a state of ID, Ohio ID. I didn't have anything that I thought could meet the requirement to take the ACT, so I didn't take the ACT. I'm sure that there are ways around it. I just didn't have anybody to guide me in that step. So just from that, you know that your journey is going to be different. I remember being angry as a teen because I felt like the USA was not extending, an arm, was not extending an opportunity to be a full-fledged member of society. So there's a lot of that, but I think primarily it revolves around fear of deportation, and then also just not feeling like you're a member of this community growing up the way we do.
I'm just going to add one cautionary note, because I think you've heard all of the things that are there, but I think the other thing to remember is that many of the folks who've come to the U.S. Lived in countries where the government was actively opposed to them, or in the chaos that the government was creating, they couldn't live a safe and stable life. So governments to them are dangerous. And frankly, in today's federal milieu, our federal government is threatening and dangerous, and showing up at Our Lady of Guadalupe is a real problem. So I think it's important not just to understand, it's critically important to understand that they have experienced trauma and are experiencing trauma, but I think you really also have to understand that in today's environment, it's being reactivated daily. And so they've not even come to the place where they can actually start to heal and get better because they don't know if ICE is going to show up. I was born in the U.S., so I don't have to worry, but I cringe every time I see a police with someone pulled over who's brown. I think about stopping. Do you need a lawyer? Here's my card. Stop talking right now. But I think we have to recognize people are being regularly re-traumatized.
Thank you all. And this was not a question I set out in advance, so this is going to be on the fly. But I hate to end on a bad note. So our next step will be going to a group discussion. You're already conveniently located in your groups of 4. But to end on a positive note, in a word or sentence, what is something that makes you smile about immigrants, new Americans, and refugees? Go as it comes to you.
Immigrants make the world better. Yeah, and getting a hug from them just because is probably the best thing.
To me, immigrants are very loving and very strong, because coming from that space and you can afford to smile every day, something you can't take for granted.
I love that immigrants work very hard despite the circumstances. I'm all about being scrappy and hungry and wanting that upward mobility. I think it's very American.
Community. So one of the things about Native-born Americans and working professionals is like, well, okay, I can see you Tuesday at 10 when I am with my immigrant friends and clients. We are talking, time doesn't matter. It's about what we're experiencing with each other. Community, I love it.
If you haven't been to a naturalization ceremony, that is one thing that really, really makes me absolutely smile. But again, aren't we all immigrants? So the notion that what makes us happy about immigrants, I think we're all immigrants, so we all should be happy at all times.
Round of applause for our panelists. Thank you all for being here. We are going to be moving to the panel discussion, we did the panel discussion. We'll be moving to the group discussion, but I invite you to walk around, hear what folks have to say. Your input has been invaluable. For you all sitting down, at the beginning of your table, if you could still find them, there was a small packet, and on the second page are some kind of facilitating questions. For the next 15 minutes, the goal is to not let this die here. What can we do in our communities? And this is important information. I'd like to take this time to say thank you to Commissioners Mary Howard, Allison Poirier, Dr. Jindal, and Rebecca Nelson. Our commissioners are very supportive, and we are here to learn about what you're about to talk about. So we will be recording this information, and the reason we had you sign in the beginning is because we'll be sending out the accumulation of what we write down. So that second page actually belongs to me. I want that info. The first page belongs to you. So next 15 minutes, go ahead and get started, and then we will, for the last 10 minutes, kind of talk about what we've learned. Yeah. I am so sorry that we invited you to speak and have to stop it, but we wanted to have the opportunity to have some members of the audience come up and share what they learned today. So you know who you are. If I spoke to you or Gail spoke to you, please come up to the front right now. And while they come up to the front, I just want to say thank you one last time. We are having a third Lunch and Learn on January the 20th. You can find more information on your first sheet at the bottom. It will be on religion and trauma. Sorry? Thursday, June 20th. Did I say a different day? I said January. Thank you, Mr. Walters. It is not in January. All right, so the point of these next few moments is just to ask some audience members to come share what they've learned. So thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Jamie, and I am a nurse at Pregnancy Decision Health Centers, or PDHC for short. I'm addressing number 3. The question is, how can individuals make a positive difference and help prevent discrimination in our community? By my experience and through our table discussion, really be a voice. Don't be afraid of people who look different, who speak differently, who have an accent. Don't look the other way. Don't pretend somebody's not there. even if they're different from you. Engage. So we have three L's: listen, lend a hand, and learn. So really listen to them. Talk to each other. We're all people. We're not this group and this group and this group, even though we've made that as a society. But we're all people. We are all the same at heart. So listen and learn about each other. Learn about family. Learn about their day. And then lend a hand. A lot of women that come to me are in extreme situations sometimes. Help connect them to resources. Be their voice in that way and be their advocate. Just yesterday I had a woman, a Nepali woman, who didn't really know where to start, but she was in a difficult situation. And I was able to connect her with community agencies that are probably represented here today. And then demonstrate by action. For me personally, I'm a people person. I like to get to know people. So just sitting down and having a conversation is a wonderful way just to show your peers and show your other people around you that it's okay to have normal conversations with really everybody. I mean, I like to have conversations. I'm a mother. We have things in common. We talk about being mothers. We talk about our children. And I've become friends with a lot of women that I've worked with. My husband is also an immigrant. He was undocumented at one time, and I've been through that journey with him. He's now a U.S. citizen, but he still gets looks. He still has an accent. He still has a different skin color. My children are mixed race, and my hope is that we could have a better community so they can grow up in a more loving and supportive community and not have to deal with some of the things that we're seeing now as adults. So by the time they're adults, they'll be able to have a smoother transition into that. So thank you.
Hello, my name is Joe Imbergia, and I'm with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. I'm an extern for the summer with the Community Outreach and Engagement Unit. So first I want to thank the Department of Neighborhoods for having this event because it was super informative for us. So what we kind of discussed at my table was the importance of avoiding isolation. And so kind of building off what you said, listen, learn, and lend a hand, that was it. So so if you have isolation, we kind of thought you're not really engaging with other people, you're not growing. By having a group that's isolated in a community, the one member of our table mentioned Hilltop and having a Somali community that's very isolated from the rest of the community. So with that isolation, the other people around don't actually engage with them, so they don't grow, they don't learn about that culture. And by not learning about the culture, it creates more assumptions. And so by doing that, it just creates more discrimination overall. And then kind of moving on to the second question, we talked about trauma and how everybody experiences trauma in a different way. And so just by always being there and being able to lend a hand, it's super important, and it can always make anybody's life easier. You know, even if you help one person out, it means something. And so I just kind of wanted to hit on those points. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Genesis Shine. I guess I'm officially here because I'm a community health worker, but I create initiatives in the community, so you probably see me around a lot of places. Just to touch on a little bit what everyone else said, our group took it back to the step of where these discriminations actually came from, and actually understanding that it's kind of like calling the kettle black. So we're discriminating against people when this is actually how we all got here. So just taking it back and creating cultural competency by educating people. And then everyone's talking about isolating. Well, we wanted to touch on how it's not just ethnic where you have culture. There's cultural diversity, in subcultures and all over your community, and just recognizing that that diversity is actually what helps grow us as a community. So we wanted to touch on actually going back and understanding where that misunderstanding that we don't know each other, which is what produces us to be discriminatory towards each other. So addressing that and educating it, and then creating spaces where you are allowed to ask questions, where you are allowed to participate in each other's culture, so that we don't have those insecurities about why we're different. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Betha Obayoana. I'm with the YMCA of Central Ohio, and we discussed a lot. It was a lot of gainful information at our table. I'd like to just discuss number 2, which is why is it important to address trauma in our neighborhoods, specifically for our youth and our children. It's important for folks who work with our youth and our children, particularly the new Americans. When you see behavioral issues, it's really important to understand that behavioral inconsistencies are probably a result of a certain form of trauma. And so to have an understanding of that, and some compassion and sympathy towards that is really important. Another thing is, number 3 is how can individuals make a positive difference and help prevent discrimination in our community? A really good point that was made at our table was that everything in which we should do with filtering through this lens of trauma, this lens of new American experiences, like in everything, not just when you meet a new American, but really in how you engage with the community at large, how do you employ, how do you interview, just look through that lens of cultural competency, really. And if I could just add, we have all agreed that new Americans are an asset to our community, and at the YMCA of Central Ohio, we definitely do appreciate that, and we would love to hire any new Americans, of course everybody, but we're always hiring, and we're really doing our push for our camp counselors. This is a great short-term experience for folks to really feel welcome in a professional setting. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Look at that, we're ending at 1 on the dot. So on the behalf of Department of Neighborhoods, thank you so much for being here and demonstrating the importance of this work. We talked about national origin as a protected class. Hopefully we learned something about that trauma and what we can all do to help. So again, I've said this is my 3rd time saying it. This conversation doesn't end here. Please leave your second piece of paper at your table. If you have time, fill out the evaluation. Thank you, Gail Gray and the Department of Neighborhood staff for supporting this effort. And please join us on June the 20th, Thursday, for our conversation on religion and trauma. Thank you all and have a great day.